Uh-oh. I think my internet's crashing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, my internet. Oh, my internet. Okay, my internet's fine. Oh, snap. All of a sudden, everything just like went blank and like you froze and like all my widgets just started displaying no internet connection. I'm like, what? My internet never goes down. Knock on wood.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of the Magus Brothers podcast. I am Tyler, and with me always is...
Hey, y'all, I'm Feyerbrand, and thank you for joining me for what I actually am having a hard time believing is already episode 6. That's pretty crazy.
I know we've been sticking with it, and, you know, it's funny because... you know, I get into social interactions on Twitter with the podcast, and I'm like, hey, you know, we're just starting out. But then I'm also just like, man, episode 6, it feels like we've simultaneously been doing this for a while, but also not long enough because it's only episode 6. I think I'll feel better when we get into double digits.
I know, and it's like, you know, we say, oh, we're this new podcast, but you know, we're bi-weekly, so this is, you know, when this is released, it'll be like week 12 or whatever of doing this. And like, I feel like we are starting to at least get a pretty good grasp of how this stuff works, but I still feel so new. And like, you look at some of these other podcasts and their episode counts in like the hundreds, but yeah, I don't know. It's been a crazy time. We're already at 6.
It has been. And it's funny because, you know, it's going to get even more new. And I want to do a couple of housekeeping things before we dive into the episode. Listeners are not aware. Chris with the First Encounters podcast has been editing our audio up until this point. He has been very gracious, very wonderful. If you have not listened to the First Encounter podcast and you want to relive Final Fantasy VII as close to the first time as you possibly can, please go and listen to that podcast. Chris and Haney are great.
Please do. It's only a benefit to yourself. It's amazing.
It really is. But as they are growing, on their Patreon, please check that out and support them. But they are starting to transition to begin tackling Zelda Majora's Mask while also tackling Crisis Core with Haney as their Patreon content. So he will essentially be doubling his workload. And to help keep his sanity, Feyerbrand will actually begin editing the audio of this podcast.
Now I get to make Tyler sound as dumb as I want. The master plan.
Yes, he will. It was the slow game, the long game.
I was playing the long con, and so seriously, this will be the first time I ever edited a podcast. I have done videos and such for, you know, my YouTube and all that. But if you guys ever feel the need to give me constructive criticism, not just bashing, but constructive criticism, I am very open to anything. I am not a defensive person. I can admit my faults.
And I do want to take, before we transition into this episode and talk about where we're going with this, I do want to take a brief moment to, from the bottom of our Final Fantasy filled hearts, thank you so much, Chris, for what you did in helping us get this off the ground.
Yes, thank you so much. Without him, we probably would still be talking about this in massive text chains, and it never would have begun.
Yes, we would probably still be on the ground, in fact.
We would be still buried, 100% buried under the ground, 6 feet down.
So true. Transitioning away from that, we are, this episode, going to be diving into what is actually going to end up being a 3-part episode tackling the Final Fantasy VII Remake. We are continuing with our Final Fantasy VII themed July, probably into August at this point, but it felt, Feyerbrand and I were talking, and at first we wanted to, he's now completed his your second playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Remake. It is fresh in your brain.
It would be actually 3. I played it on the PS4 and PS5 version simultaneously.
Oh, damn.
So
yeah.
I completed it twice within like a day of each other.
Double dipping in his trophies. But point being, he has completed it. So it's fresh. We are ready to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. But when we were talking about it, it was just like, okay, we want to talk about the game, but then we have to talk about the ending because the ending is a big thing in and of itself. And we were like, trying to cram that all into one episode is just not going to work for us, not with the way we go off on tangents. So we had decided we would do 2 episodes for the game and then the ending. And then we ended up talking about a little bit more, and I really wanted to do an episode about where we were at in our lives and what we were doing before Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then when it was announced, because this was originally announced back in 2015, I don't remember if it was at E3 that we got that little snippet trailer with that, big voiceover about them returning that was very meta.
I think it was E3. I don't think any of the other game shows had really started up yet. I think it was.
I think you're right. But granted, 5 years, 6 years at this point, that's a long time and people change. But we were at very different places in our lives. And Final Fantasy Remake, while it may not necessarily be our favorite Final Fantasy, it really did shape the course of our lives in an interesting way. It got, we'll kind of go over this, but Feyerbrand, it got you into streaming. And propelled you into that. It got me, I don't want to say it got me into podcasts, but it got me to want to make a podcast, which is how we got to here. And that's just, a very small example. And it really kind of brought life into the Final Fantasy franchise in a period of time where Final Fantasy was very, I'm not going to use dead as an exaggeration, but Final Fantasy was in a weird place in our life because we were waiting for 15. 15 had been in development for so long. 13 was 15 wasn't out. 13.
Oh yeah, 15 didn't even come out yet.
I thought it was 2017 was when 15 came out. I thought it was years later.
I'm pretty sure 15 came out in 15.
Hold on. Fact check.
Hold on. Let's Google. 2016. November 29th, 2006. Oh, so we had a whole year and a half before 15 came out.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So we were sort of like an unenthusiastic fan base because we didn't really have anything. I guess we had 14, but if you're not into the MMOs.
I was playing.
Right, which we were playing, but if you're not an MMO player and you just play the single player games, you didn't really have much, especially if you were one of the many people who did not enjoy the 13 trilogy.
Like me.
You just haven't had anything. Yeah, you just didn't have any. You're just chilling. This sucks. And we felt defeated.
Yeah, so, yeah, and it really, I was gonna we just dove in unexpectedly right there. The trailer hit in 2015. Feyerbrand and I had previously lived together, and we were separated at this point.
We're still separated.
I know
it's awful.
But I was up here in Washington, and Feyerbrand was back in the desert Southwest, and. Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. 14 was out. We were actively playing 14, but I had played 13 when it very first came out, and I had beat it. It was so long ago when 13 came out that I don't remember. I actively try and go back and when we talk about 13, because it is a divisive title. And I try and remember, did I actually like 13 when I played it? Because 13 was my first time playing a Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy X, outside of maybe revisiting some of the older ones. So there was a lot of hype and yes, playing 13, female lead character, Lightning did look cool, and I was hyped on it, but I don't remember if I actively enjoyed it at the time. I just remember in hindsight feeling like the story was very difficult for me to follow, and it felt convoluted and et cetera, et cetera. And I remember trying... Okay. And I remember trying 13 too, and only getting a little bit in, and I was just like, I'm not feeling this.
But it was Pokemon.
Yeah, I remember that being a mechanic, but I didn't even get far enough in there to experience that mechanic in a meaningful way. I don't know if there were other games I was playing, or if it just didn't connect with me and I didn't like the characters. I don't know. But the point is I didn't get far in Final Fantasy 13 too. In 2015, prior to this trailer dropping, Final Fantasy outside of 14 wasn't a big driving force in my hobbies. I honestly think I talked more about Silent Hill and Drakengard than I did anything else.
Yeah, that's about right. And I think we were also on a big horror movie kick.
Yeah, Silent Hill kind of layered on and overlapped real big with my big horror phase, and then, as I got a kiddo, and the ability to watch horror kind of, died down. So did my interest not interest, because I'm still very interested in it, but my ability to interact with those types of media kind of died down. But then we got that trailer. I didn't know the trailer trailer was coming.
Oh, man,
I wasn't
trailer.
plugged into Reddit or Twitter or any of these things where, like, if there were rumors or leaks or whatever of it coming out, I sure as hell wasn't aware of them at that time, you know, and I don't know about you, but I didn't know it was coming is the point I'm trying to make.
I didn't know it was either. I remember watching E3. I watched it like live as they announced it. And I don't remember what drove me to watch it because I literally still to this day, like I just don't watch E3. I just watch trailers after the fact. But that was like one of the only years I'd ever watched E3 live. And I have no idea what drove me there. I can't remember. It may have been a rumor or something that drove me to just in case. I just remember watching the trailer and like my jaw literally hit the ground. And I think I messaged you immediately and you didn't believe me. You didn't believe me. You know, you're like, oh, you're BSing. Shut up, dude. No, they're not redoing it. They already said they're not doing it. And then I linked you the trailer. They did. No, I mean, you're right. They did. They said, we'll never remake 7 until we've made a Final Fantasy that's better or as good as it or something stupid. And obviously that was a lie because they haven't done that yet.
I mean, they had said.
Yeah, it hadn't even come out. But like, I remember a lot of people saying, oh, I bet 15 because of its long development cycle and then them bringing Tabata in to do 15. This is going to be the game that's good enough to give us 7. I do remember that being said a lot. So it really hyped 15 up a lot in people's minds because they're thinking that this is going to be the game to give us 7. You know, depending on who you ask, depends on how you feel about 15, but it wasn't even the game. Like I know they were interviewed later saying that the devs were like at that age where it's sort of now or never.
Yes. Yep. I think that was exactly it. They kind of decided they were at this age where if they didn't do it, they wouldn't be able to be around long enough to see it through. And other people would have to it would be handed off to other people who were doing it. And it's at that point, it's like, this is our game. Like if it's going to be done and it's going to be done, we want to be the ones to do it instead of somebody else doing it. And so they did it.
And they did it. They did it big. They did it. Well, I was going to say bad, but it's not bad.
They did that trailer and you linked it to me and I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this is real. It's happening. They had that very meta voiceover about they're returning and like
cringe.
They're talking about the characters, but talking about us. The voiceover was cringe, but like I couldn't hear the voiceover over the graphics and seeing it like in that beauty.
Oh yeah.
And then in very, I don't want to say typical Square Enix fashion, because I feel like they're not the only game dev studio that does this type of thing, but it's also very Square Enix, let's be real. And in very Square Enix fashion, we didn't hear anything about the game for a long time.
Way too long.
You know, it kind of did that whole like, okay, we know it's coming. Like there's no way Square Enix would announce Final Fantasy VII being remade and then not do it. Like if it were like some other lesser title or something like that, like there's no way. Like even Final Fantasy 15, when it was announced as Versus 13, like they took, I don't even know, 10 years arbitrarily like to put that game out, but they still did it. Like even if Final Fantasy VII Remake took 10 years, they were going to see it through. So it was radio silence. We didn't hear anything for such a long time that you fall into that whole, like, you fall back to what you were doing. You know, Final Fantasy at that point did have some wind in the sails, but it wasn't a bunch. You know, I think at that time I remember my kiddo being born, and when he was very, very young, I remember revisiting Final Fantasy IX right around that time. I remember playing Final Fantasy X again, and I remember texting you a lot about 10 back then, and I had done like which will at some point become a meme for us, but it's not going to start. It's going to start here, but we're not going to talk about my terrible luck and with save files.
Yep.
But it's a thing, and I botched somehow a save file and got like the chocobo race down to like 0.0, but didn't save, and then had to do everything all over again. It was this heinous thing. Anyway.
Oh yeah, dude, it's so bad. Oh my God. Yeah, you got it and then didn't save and then died to a Malboro in the Calm Lands.
That's what it was. You remember? Oh my God.
And you didn't say. I do remember because I was devastated for you. Because that's terrible, dude. Like,
and like that was like, it wasn't a meme at that point. It was just like an honest mistake, and now it's like a meme. But back then, that's where it started.
And like the Malboro is one of them. I think is the most rare encounter the calm lands instead. Oh, dude. Oh, I felt so terrible.
But so like I had started to revisit these games. I don't remember if I revisited 8 at this point. Right around this time, a friend of mine finally convinced me to try Final Fantasy VI. So I did Final Fantasy VI for the first time. But I was starting to revisit these Final Fantasies and tackle them again. But again, before I go any further, where were you at? I feel like I'm talking about where I was at. What about you? What were you feeling when you saw that trailer? Where were you at in your life?
So like end of 2015 is actually when my wife and I started dating. So just a few months after that, I was into a fresh relationship, and my wife and I's relationship progressed quickly. We were married in less than a year, and now we had 3 kids, and so I was busy being the husband, dad, and as far as gaming went, it was really kind of just 14 on and off, but I wasn't really doing too much hardcore stuff. I know I would like sit at work and like go on the 7 Remake subreddit. I was one of those people that was like analyzing every frame of whatever's been shown and every pixel, trying to get more information. Or we would go to the website, the official website, and look at the code. Or like I was watching like a lot of Final Fantasy Peasant on YouTube. He was one of the original creators back when this game was announced, and he was putting out a lot of content about like how the game could be. And so I was really wrapped up in that stuff in my free time at work, and it was honestly wearing on me a lot, like mentally. It was really draining me. I know that sounds weird because it's just a video game, but like Final Fantasy VII is my favorite video game of all time. And, we've been asking for a remake for so long, and we finally knew we were getting one, but we didn't know when. Like, that was just so emotionally and mentally draining on me, as like the 30 of us on the subreddit would just lose our minds at every little detail and go over everything. And it was just a weird time. And I think I started playing like some Pokemon Go.
Yep.
I played a lot of Pokemon Go.
Yep. Same.
Yeah. That's actually kind of how like, I don't want to say our friendship like started again, but it was more like our friendship reignited because we were just sort of in a lull.
Yeah, because we always we were at, you were starting your family and stuff like that, and recently married, and I was up here doing my thing, and we haven't always, we've been friends pretty consistently from the time we met, but there's definitely been little peaks and valleys in that time frame where we just didn't talk as much, and we just weren't talking at that time a lot. And I do remember we had some spike conversation in 2015 when the remake was first announced, and then I had started playing Pokemon Go. I don't want to say I got you to check it out, because I think you started and tried it out.
I think you were the one who just said, you had just mentioned it, you're like, oh hey, this game's coming out, and like that was the end of it. And then I was playing it, and then like I kind of stopped, and then I saw you make a post saying how you got like an X-Raid pass, and I remember texting you, dude, what's an X-Raid pass? And you were like, oh my God, you play Pokemon Go? I'm like, yeah, dude, like it's cool, bro, like chill out. And you're like, oh my God, freaking nerdgasm, let me tell you everything, because he's a Pokemon master.
This is canonically how I sound in real life. When I'm into something, that's how I sound. But yeah, so like it was right around that, and because of Pokemon Go that we started talking a ton again. I'm as whatever Pokemon Go is, I'm super glad and thankful, because it did kind of get us back into each other's life consistently on a daily basis, and I think we haven't had a lull since then.
No, I think we've talked every single day, almost all day, for like the last 3 to 4 years.
Yep, it's tight.
You're like my second wife.
Yes.
My wife calls you my other wife.
Hey, I'm okay with that.
So am I. I don't care.
But so then we were doing Pokemon Go, doing our thing, not really getting much information. And again, I was not on the Reddit train as far as Final Fantasy goes, in the same way as far as like digging in for information the way you were. But around, what was it? It was 2019. Sony, I don't even know if it was their very first State of Play, but they started their whole State of Play thing, which is great that Sony is doing that. And fingers crossed. I don't want to tangent off too much, but we've got one coming up based off of all the rumors and leaks and such. And I'm really, really hoping we get some Final Fantasy 16 goodness in there. But coming back around, we got that state of play in 2019, and we got the first updated trailer for Final Fantasy 7 Remake. And it wasn't just a trailer, because a lot of game studios, Square Enix, like, a game will look great in pre-rendered cutscenes, and you can make a pre-rendered cutscene look phenomenal when you're that type of game studio, but like doesn't necessarily mean the graphics in game, the playable segments are always that great. But they just like bursted out the door where we saw combat, we saw pre-rendered cutscenes, all of it. Like, they showed us everything, like actual game footage and stuff. And it was just like, oh my God. You know, we had a little, I think it was because of that state of play event, we started a little group chat with another friend where we were just constantly hype train going along, like full speed ahead, talking about this. And, you know, then we started to get the whole drip news feed. We started to get information. And it was right around there where we found out, I don't know if it was in the same state of play or in like a news release right after, but we found out that it was going to be a multi-part release. It wasn't going to be them remaking the entire game at once. I don't know if we knew that before the state of play or whatever, but we're just gonna power through. But we found out they were going to be doing the game as a multi-part release, which, how did you feel about that?
I don't know. I guess I still kind of feel the same way, where that's not what I want, because I'm greedy and I want to play it all. I don't want to wait. My patience is gone. I understand why it's being done this way. Like, if they're going to do it, they do it right and they do it big. And in order to do it that way, it has to be in multiple parts. So I understand it and I've accepted it, but I don't like it. I want it all at once. I want it right now. I want to play it. I want to experience it.
Yeah, that was I've never played, you know, I didn't play all the parts of 13, and I don't know if it was imagined that way from the inception, but I did intellectually, because there's that part where it's like, of course I want it all at once. Who wants to wait for something they've been waiting for already that long? But intellectually, I was like, you know what, this makes perfect sense, because if they're going to make, looking at this trailer and looking at what they want to do with this game, with the graphical fidelity and all of that, and like, of course, we knew instantly, based off the trailer, that they were gonna, I don't want to say fluff, because fluff has that connotation where it's like it's not needed, but they were gonna spruce up and fluff up the character interactions, the dialogue. You know, 7, those types of games back then were very, very punchy, you know, and quick paced, but they really could like sit in and develop these characters, just like Biggs, Weggs, and Jesse got more development than they ever got in the original. They were gonna luxurize, really build out this game in more ways than what it was previously. So like, knowing that, plus the graphical fidelity, I was like, there is no way, I can't fathom a game as big as, with them being faithful to Final Fantasy 7 and them doing a remake, there's no way they could do that all and have that out in a timely fashion. Of course, breaking it up into parts makes sense. Yep. I think what the big thing for me, and the part where I was like, was when we found out that part 1 was going to just be Midgar. And the reason I even remotely hesitated at that part is because, one, they weren't telling us how many parts this game was going to be. And we still don't know how many parts this is going to be. I don't know that when part 2 comes out, that they will tell us then how many parts this game is going to be. We'll just be able to make a better judgment call after seeing where part 2 ends. Their wording, I believe, in marketing releases and stuff, they had specifically said that each part will be about the length of one of the Final Fantasy 13s. Now, a lot of people led to speculation over that, meaning that this might be 3 parts, just like Final Fantasy 13. They haven't confirmed and actually stated that that is in fact the case. I think you and I both would love 3 parts, but I'm erring on the side of, I really do think it'll be 4 parts. But point is, we don't know how many parts this is going to take. There was worry about, this is just Midgar. It took them 5 years to get this part out. Will we have to wait another 5 years to get the next part? Ultimately, we don't have the answer to that question yet, but we did find out that 5 years took 5 years, in part because it was originally, I don't know if the entire game was being outsourced to CyberConnect 2. Is that what they were called?
Yeah, CyberConnect 2. And I don't know either if it was everything or if they were just, you know, using them to build up assets or whatever, but But then, yeah, like they were this other studio that Square brought in, and that even scared us, knowing that there was a non-Square Enix people had their hands on this that didn't have direct oversight from, Kitase and Nomura and all them, and that was worrying. And then we find out that Square decided to scrap that, bring it all in-house, and trash everything that CyberConnect 2 did. So now we're sitting here left thinking, does that mean they're starting from scratch? Like, because we never knew how much they outsourced. Like, we never knew. We just knew that they were. So, like, following this game's news as it broke was devastating almost constantly.
It was a roller
coaster. All it sounded like, it was a roller coaster. All it ever sounded like was like bad news, but like you would get that high, like the high of the roller coaster, because you're like, oh my gosh, remake news, and you'd get super freaking excited and you'd run to the computer or whatever to look it up, and you're like, oh yeah, they're scrapping all these assets and starting this all over, and you're like, oh Jesus, and then your heart falls into your stomach and you're like, here we go again, oh God, dude, it's so terrible.
It was wild. But ultimately, the punchline being that it took 5 years and there was some troubled development with this second studio, bringing them in, taking them out. We don't know how much had to be redone and stuff like that within Square Enix. That actually did provide me some comfort. I was like, okay, I understand why this took 5 years and why we didn't hear anything. And hopefully these subsequent releases are able to be turned around faster. I have hope because, one, not only shortly after a year of the game releasing, we got DLC 2 chapters that added to the story, which was great to kind of like tide us over with the intermission in Yuffie. They've even said in a press release that development time will be faster because they've already got all of these assets, the characters, and all of that stuff, like all of that initial groundwork that you take to build everything up from the ground. They have a lot of that to carry over. We're going to circle back around to the marketing aspect and what the actual game devs were saying versus what we actually see in a minute, because I have some sticking points there. But it sounds positive. It sounds like, I don't know if it was Kitase or Nomura, but they've even specifically said they would prefer to release smaller parts so that they can get content out faster and more frequently to us instead of bigger parts. But ultimately, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. A lot of people, there was a lot of division over the split parts because they're like, oh, are they going to charge us full game price for each part? Are we going to have to pay $200 or $180 or $240 for the whole game by the time it comes out? And people were upset about that.
Yeah, and like I understood, or I guess I understand where those people are coming from, where, they don't want to have to pay for all these different games. While I get that, I'm going to buy the game regardless. And if I'm paying $60, I expect a full game. And they delivered that with part 1. I have no problems with how much I paid for part 1. In fact, I think it was well worth the money. I mean, I did get the first class edition. Like I went in on faith alone, hoping that this was going to be worth it. And I feel like my faith was well placed. There's always going to be a negative side to every aspect, every fandom, whatever. And you can't always make everybody happy. And the thing is I think Square proved that doing it in multiple parts is the way to go. And that charging a normal game price, I guess now in current gen, it's like $70 American or whatever. But they've shown that these games are going to be worth that price tag. We're not getting like an intermission, like the intermission DLC isn't $60. I would totally be behind them if we got something as short as intermission. They're like, oh, here's part 1, here's Midgar, $60, please. And then I'd be like, no, kick rocks, guys. Like, that's BS. But no, we got 18 chapters.
Even if it was half the amount that we got with Midgar, I would understand like the saltiness. But I really did feel like Midgar in part 1, I want to be careful with my wording here, because I do feel like they really wanted to emphasize, and this goes back to that marketing thing, where they wanted part 1 to feel like a complete game. And I feel like we got a solid $60 worth of game mechanics and gameplay, but from like a narrative standpoint and the cliffhangers they left us on and stuff like that, like there's a part of me where I'm just like, okay, was that really a full complete game? Like, it very obviously there's so much you left unanswered for us, and sometimes I'm just like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, like if you'd never played the original Final Fantasy VII, and if this is you, if this is somebody listening, if this is you, you've never played the original Final Fantasy VII, but you have played the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I would like your input because I will never be able to answer this question. Like, did that feel like a complete cohesive story? Like, obviously it's open-ended, no matter if you played the OG or not. We know that's open-ended, but like, what was that actually a resolution to everything we witnessed, or did you just kind of feel like you just got blue-balled, for lack of a better term? Like, I don't know. Like, I know it's not complete. Yeah, like I know it's not complete because I know the rest of the story. But to somebody who doesn't know the rest of the story, did that feel like the full like narrative of a video game, a $60 video game? I don't know. I can't answer that. Please, somebody chime in and answer it.
You paid $60 for a to be continued. It's an interesting discussion, but I do feel like it was a weird place for them to end it narratively. And like I still don't know how I feel about that. But as far as like the gameplay and like what I actually did and the time I spent, like hell yeah, it was $60 worth. Like I thought it was great. One of the other marketing things that stuck with me that I'm still just not a super big fan of, but I don't know if it was the marketing or if it was my expectation. There's that line blurred where you build what you're going to get in your head before you actually get to the game when you follow the marketing as closely as we did. One of the reasons they talked about making part 1 just the Midgar segment is because Midgar is a huge dystopian cyberpunk city with like 8 sectors, right? It's this massive city. And in the original Final Fantasy VII, you're in Sector 7, and that's where, Seventh Heaven is. You go to Sector 5 for the bombing there with Airbuster. And where else? You're in Shinra headquarters. Do you visit any of the other sectors? Sector 6 is Wall Market, right?
Oh, I guess, yeah, your Wall Market. Technically, the first reactor is Sector 1. But like, that's kind of it.
So like you don't see, for as big as Midgar is, you don't see a lot of Midgar is my point in the original. And one of the big things they emphasize in the marketing is that Midgar is this big city, but you only get to see this small little bit of it. And they really wanted to make Midgar feel more lived in, make it expansive. You can see it more and visit more and stuff like that. And I was just like tight. Like I had this vision in my head where Midgar was going to be essentially this like open world city that you'd be able to cruise around in and see so much of. And then what we got was not that. What we got was the extra parts of Midgar you see is, we have this Jessie chapter where you run off with Jessie and you go up to the upper plate and you see her parents go to a weapons facility to steal some stuff. So that, that part of Midgar that we saw was new. They did obviously really expand the areas like the Sector 7 slums, like that all fit on a single screen back in OG. And like they obviously needed to build these areas up bigger. We didn't see all that more of Midgar that I thought we were going to for this being part 1 of that game. Again, I don't want to say I'm bitter about it, but I have to kind of sit there and look and be like, was this my fault? Did I misread this and like look and build this up too much in my head? I loved the game ultimately. Like it doesn't matter because I loved the game. I Remake is probably one of my favorite video games ever. And it really, really did great things for me, but I don't want to dive in. We're going to assess Remake and how we felt about it in next episode. But ultimately, I'm just talking about the marketing that led up to it.
And I have a lot of feelings.
Yes, we both do. But that marketing, we were following every drip of news leading up to this game, and it built expectations. I had expectations where Midgar was going to be this massive open world city that we were going to be able to just explore. What about you? What expectations did you have going into this based off of trailers coming through and what we were seeing?
Honestly, I can't remember any specific expectations. I know, and I shouldn't even say expectation, but more of this picture that I painted in my head of how I imagined the game was going to be. Because I don't want to say I expected them. I didn't expect anything of them other than to deliver on what they said. So I kind of painted this big picture in my head, and really, I can't really describe it because I didn't know. I guess is for a lack of imagination on my part. I could not come up with how it would look or how it would feel or how I wanted it to feel. I mean, at first I'll admit I was somewhat of a purist where I just wanted it to be 1-for-1 with better graphics. But as more information released, I started being okay with the changes and the combat and like when I found out like, oh, hey, these characters are getting expanded stories and, I was starting to I got on board with the changes. But I really built this game up in my head. Like I've been playing this game to completion a couple times a year for 20 or so years, to where I just had this huge grand idea of what it is. And playing the remake, it looked like Final Fantasy VII and it sounded like Final Fantasy VII and it had the characters from Final Fantasy VII. It wasn't Final Fantasy VII. And I say that in the sense that it's not the same game. It's the same characters and the same world, but it's not the same game as the OG. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that because I just wanted it to be the same game. And I don't even mean like changes wise. It's just it's not Final Fantasy VII. It's Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Yeah, and I think that's well put because we really did. It kind of builds that whole like this is with doing. We had expectations of the character, of the story, and stuff like that. And there are a lot of people out there that are purists. We're expecting a 1-for-1 remake. We're expecting the game to just be the same thing, same dialogue, all of these things with just better graphics. Or there's people like one of the guests we're going to bring on that expected, a little bit of expansion, but not much. And then just being like a 1-for-1 remake. And ultimately, that's not what we got. But again, we will kind of talk about that in the next episode. But really wanting to emphasize this whole, there were expectations. There was no way as a fan of this game, the original being as big a part of our lives as it was, there was no way to go into this game for us or really anyone, I don't think, without bias painting your experience. On one hand, that's unfortunate. But on the other hand, like it's unavoidable. Final Fantasy VII changed the landscape of all video games, or the industry, I should say, when it came out back in 1997. And so there was just no way to experience this game without some bias or some expectation in your head.
I want to jump in real quick because you reminded me of something. So I remember in the cycle up to the release, I would constantly spout this and I would say the original Final Fantasy VII formed an entire generation of gamers. And I was expecting the remake to form another generation of gamers. I don't think the remake is going to do that at all, because it doesn't have that same impact as the original did. Because of the groundwork that the original made, all these other games were able to do similar things and create, emotionally investing stories to the point where the remake isn't going to have that same impact. I was expecting, I will say this, I was expecting the remake to have the same, I guess, gaming cultural impact as the OG did, but there's just too many other games that are as good or better now.
Yeah, and I don't think you can change the gaming landscape the way Final Fantasy VII did when you are remaking the same, or just remaking a game, period. Like, we already know what to expect, and even though we got more than what we thought we were going to, the beats are still there. Like, ultimately, these same things are going to happen, and it's a story and characters we're familiar with. So, like, you can recapture it and make people feel reconnected in a new way, but you can't change and redo the landscape with a remake. And like you said, it paved the way for a whole new style of game and narrative of game, and we got those games for 20 plus years. And not only that, Japan is no longer I don't want to say the premier, but Japan is no longer the only gaming place where RPGs can come out and be massively successful. We've seen in this time Western RPGs that are different. They're not all turn-based. The gaming landscape has changed, but we've seen games like The Witcher 3 that have really changed the shape of what RPGs are in general for everyone. It's just a different environment, different consoles, different landscape. Gamers are different. Expectations, they were there. We had them. We were getting these trailers. It looked fantastic. And then as we were getting closer to the demo announcement, which I don't remember how much of a heads up we had on the demo. I think it wasn't too big a heads up. It was actually really quick. But leading up to what we knew a demo was coming, because they were showcasing it at events and such like that, started to, and you're probably more, aware or on the up and up on your timeline for all this. But right around this time, you started to pursue streaming. So take us there. Take us to where your mind was at and how you got into this.
I was hyped. I was beyond hyped. I had so much like anxious and nervous energy that I didn't know what to do with myself. I constantly was feeling restless, and I couldn't just sit around and just think about these things. It wasn't enough. I needed to channel this energy some way. And so I decided that I was going to start streaming and doing content creation, because one of my favorite things to do is talk about Final Fantasy. And what better way to do that than create a community that wants to talk about Final Fantasy? I dabbled in streaming and made a buttload of mistakes. I still make mistakes. I've only been streaming like a year and a half or so. And I only started taking YouTube seriously in the last couple of months and stuff. And like, streaming was fun. I had my two closest friends were always in my streams, and I was playing Final Fantasy games, and it was letting me channel that anxious energy, that energy that spent its time, going over every pixel in these screenshots. It let me channel that into something more productive and something creative. And it helped calm me down, like kind of let me take a step back and really think about things about this game more clearly. And so, I'm still streaming now and, going on with YouTube and starting to somewhat take it a little more seriously than I was back then. And in all my streams, I wear a red headband because of Avalanche. If this game never came to be, I probably still wouldn't be streaming. I would be just another dude, just another guy in the crowd. And, I was happy then, and I'm happy now streaming, but now I get to channel all of this anxious energy into something. And so it's been a pretty wild ride, and I really enjoy creating, and I'm glad I get the opportunity to do so. And now I'm doubly glad I get the opportunity to do so with my best friend. It makes it even better. Yeah, it's been great. It's really impacted my life a lot, because it's kind of turned all my hobby time into create time. Even if I don't create the biggest or best content, it's still mine. I constantly learn and improve with every new thing I make. It's been great. I'm so glad that my content creation career came out of this. It's been fantastic. It actually kind of did the same thing for you, Tyler.
It did, yeah. So it was definitely after the remake was announced. I had never been into podcasts. I thought podcasts were silly. I thought it was just radio on the internet. I don't listen to the radio even when I'm in the car. I've always been like a, playlist CD. I've got tons of music loaded up on my phone, and I'm listening to something specific. My partner, when she was in school, had a course on, I don't remember what the actual course was, but for one of the classes, she had to make like a little mini podcast with one of her classmates. And in doing so, she was listening to some podcasts, and I think it was Bloody Disgusting. She listened to a podcast through them. I actually was like, this is kind of cool. I ended up getting a job where you could listen to music or headphones or whatever the hell you wanted the entire time. I still have that job, and it's great. I slowly got to the point to where I checked out a horror podcast, got sucked into the rabbit hole of podcasts. I love it. I really started out with like narratively driven podcasts, the Magnus Archives, and then it's been one of my big favorites. And then We're Alive. It was like watching a movie, but you're not watching it, you're listening to it. I've always been the type of person who would have a movie on for literally just background noise while I did something else. I was getting great story listening to podcasts. And then Remake came out. At that point, like podcasting was just my jam. Like I was like, music is still great, and I love music, and it's very important in my life, but I honestly listen to podcasts more than I do music. I had this thought after Remake came out, and I was just like, I want to make a podcast where I compare the Final Fantasy VII Remake to the Final Fantasy VII OG. And that's what I wanted to do. There were a lot of issues with my motivation, with figuring out what that would look like. I started listening to other gaming podcasts and getting into following content creators on Final Fantasy VII Remake. And honestly, Final Fantasy VII Remake birthed a ton of content creators. There's so many people who really took off because of this game, and they are great, wonderful content creators. But seeing the level of detail that people were able to get into with Remake, and I don't mean this in a way to be hard on myself, but I instantly knew that it was not something that I was capable of for a variety of reasons. One, I just did not have that level of attention to detail as they did, even on my playthroughs of Remake, or I just didn't have the time or the energy with all of the things I was doing with my family and had going on in my life. I didn't have that capability. And I was like, these people are putting out content that I feel like if I were to go in and make a podcast, I would just be ripping them off. So it kind of evolved over time. And I know I was talking with you about wanting to do a podcast for a long time. I had always wanted to ask you, because I felt that, one, having somebody to riff off on a podcast is always going to be way more fun and entertaining than like one person monologuing. But two, you were really getting into your streaming, and at that time you were on Twitch, but really wanting to grow that community. And I didn't want to take your energy away from that. But then enough time passed and I finally was like, yo, do you want to do this with me? It would be like this format where we're just BSing about all things Final Fantasy and not just the remake. You know, I don't remember exactly what you said, but you were just like, yes.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I said yes. That's why we're here today. Yeah, like I had always secretly wanted to do it with you, which is what's funny, but I didn't want to like push myself into your ideas or your plans, because I was like, well, this is his thing. You know, if he wants my input or whatever, because you had always talked about doing it solo, and you're like, oh, I'll have you on as a guest for this episode because you know so much about this game. I'm like, totally, I'm there. Just let me know when. Secretly in the back of my mind, I'm like, I just want to co-host this thing with him, like because like this is what we do anyways.
We were just being so considerate of each other,
and I was just like, I don't want to force myself into this thing. I don't want to put him into a position where, you know, you might want to say no to me, or you want to say no, but you're afraid to say no because, you know, we're best friends and you hate to say no to your best friend. And I just didn't want to put you in a weird situation. I'm like, you know what? I'll just keep my mouth shut. If he wants it, he'll ask. And when you finally asked, I remember looking at my wife and I was like, he asked. I was like, I said yes. And she's like, what? You're making it sound like a marriage proposal. I'm like, it basically is. He basically just proposed to me. We're doing this. And it was great, and it is great.
That's great. I did not know that.
Well, you don't know everything.
But yeah, and you know, we had some issues starting out. I think we recorded our episode, like the first episode, like 2 or 3 times, and
three or 4 times.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. You know, then we met Chris with the First Encounter podcast, because the big hurdle was the audio editing aspect, and I was just like, so mentally tapped on where my bandwidth was and tackling that. Chris came in and helped, got us off the ground, and now we have this momentum and this energy, and here we are. But before, you know, we get too further, because at that point Remake has been out for a while, I want to kind of back up and touch on the one last thing before we kind of wrap this episode up. Was we finally the game ended up in 2020. COVID happened. It affected a lot of things, but fortunately for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, it was at essentially the end of its development at that point. It ended up getting delayed by like a month, I think is what it ultimately was delayed by.
1 or 2. Yeah, I don't remember the original release date.
I thought it was like March, and then it got delayed out to April 20th or whatever it was. The game got delayed slightly, which honestly, that type of stuff happens regardless of COVID. That's a pretty regular thing. COVID was a factor there. I know there were a lot of issues and concerns over shipping it out, people getting it on certain days that, you know, there was a big freight, like essentially moving this product was a big concern right when it released. They ended up shortly after the game was supposed to be releasing the demo. And we, you know, not being the people who were going to these big conventions and events and, you know, PAX and all these things, got to play the game. It's funny because they released the demo and it was chapter 1 with a couple, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 scenes removed. I know the Tifa scene where he's out, you know, and he leaves. He has that flashback.
Oh yeah, back in Nibelheim.
Yeah, when they're kids. That was not there in the demo. Essentially, it was a beat for beat of chapter 1 of the game. Aside from just a couple of things like that flashback, you know, expanded dialogue, it is essentially like a beat for beat remake of the bombing mission from the original Final Fantasy. So a lot of people played the demo, saw what they were dealing with or getting, and it was just like, oh man, this is going to be great. And chapter 1 is very, very faithful to the original. And then we get into chapter 2 and it just starts to very obviously go a completely different direction. So I don't want to say they bait and switched us by giving us the demo of chapter 1. Chapter 1, the demo was very faithful to what we got with the original, and it blew my mind. I mean, I don't know about you, but playing that demo just blew my damn mind. I don't know the number of times I played it, but it was so good. I mean, chapter 1 is still great. I mean, there's so many great chapters in the remake, and even chapter 2, which really started to divert away from immediately going, oh, this is not a beat for beat remake. Chapter 2 is great, but like that demo was phenomenal. Like I was in bliss waiting for that game to come out.
I remember, I believe I streamed me playing the demo for the first time. I think I left work early.
You did, I remember.
Yeah, I think so, because the day it released, I left work early because I was so excited. My boss was just like, do you need to leave? I'm like, yep, see you later. And so I just bounced. And I came home and I streamed it.
Yeah, I think I watched you stream it before I even got to play it.
After playing it, I had to lay down on the floor. I was feeling so many different things, like awe, excitement, just hype, just everything. It was so intense that on stream, I just went and laid down on the floor to try to process what I just experienced. Hey, if you want to see, I'm pretty sure that video is on my YouTube. So that's there. You could go find it. That's a thing.
It'll be a link in the description.
Yeah, let me find that video. We'll link it. That demo blew my mind. And then I was like, yep, this is the right choice. Streaming's the right choice. This game is going to be incredible. I can't wait for it. And then we binged the game when it released in a day or two. It was so quick. Lost sleep, so much sleep.
I remember I took a couple days off from work, so I had a 4-day weekend, and I'm pretty sure I finished the game right at the end of it. Just devoured the game. Yeah, it was a very, very hype-filled, exciting time to get the hands on it. It was also weird because it was also I was now working from home. COVID was really in full swing, because we locked down as a country mid-March. I started working from home. I had concerns about the game not making it to me day of, because I had pretty sure I got mine through GameStop.
Yeah.
We weren't sure it was getting the physical version was even going to get to me that day. So I was like, oh, hell no. So I bought it on digital. And then lo and behold, the game actually did arrive on the day of release. And I ended up giving the physical copy to a friend so they could experience it for the first time. Yeah, it was a really weird place in the world that Remake also came out, but I'm glad it did, because it was a scary place in the world, and Remake provided this heavy sense of comfort and excitement in a time that would otherwise would have been just scary without.
Yeah, it was definitely a comfort blanket, I think, for a lot of us, because of how scary the world was. And we're diving into something familiar, but it's also new and exciting. And there's tons and tons of people out there to talk about it with.
Yep. It also came out at an interesting place in my life, because my kiddo at that point was 4 going on 5. And he was being exposed to Final Fantasy VII for the first time. And his reaction to characters in the demo and the game was very, very excitement. And we're at this point now to where he's got 2 wooden swords of the Buster Sword. He's got a wooden version of Hard Edge from the remake. And he's got... Hard Edge was in the original, but it looked a bit different in Remake. He's got a cardboard gun arm so that he could match with Barrett that we made. He's got a foam shuriken for Yuffie. He's got a long bamboo stick that he uses for Sephiroth. He's got a small wooden stick and a white button-down shirt that he leaves buttons open when he's pretending to be Reno. He's got a staff for Aerith, and he's got these little gloves for Tifa. He can be any character from that game when he wants to, and we do pretend play. He has learned, he's got a little keyboard, and he's learned the opening 6 notes to Aerith's theme. He's very into whatever, like, he's very into Breath of the Wild, for example, and Mario. So like I don't want to make it sound like he lives and dies by Final Fantasy VII. He's very into like the music of all games, but he runs around humming One Winged Angel and all of these things. He's very into it. And it's exciting to get to see somebody experience that for the first time and be super, super hyped on it. Yeah, it really was an amazing, like, it felt like a new chapter in my life, this game coming out. Like, it's a little cheesy to say it that way, but it really did,
That's not cheesy at all. That's wholesome.
But it is the truth. The start of your streaming, because that was your journey, but I was along with you. I was, in those channels. You were coming to me with ideas for layouts and showing me progress updates for these things you were doing, and I loved it. And we spitballed, and then I was trying to go this podcasting route. I was absorbed in this game. My kiddo was, getting absorbed into this game, and, a fan. So it really did feel like a new chapter as far as, media and entertainment goes in my life. And while we will get into it in the next episode, especially for yourself, for me, because as much as I love Remake, there's a couple of things I wish would have been done differently, but it's complete bias and expectation because I can't. This is a game that I loved and played for 20 plus years. So like, how can you be objective? I cannot be upset at this game even slightly because of just the course it propelled our lives. And I love it. And Final Fantasy VII Remake will forever be one of my favorite games, hands down, period, end of discussion.
I completely get what you said, and I agree. Like this game for us just opened up this whole new section of our lives, and I will forever be thankful for it, no matter what direction Square takes this game and whether or not I like the next parts or agree with decisions they have made or are going to make, no matter what. But I will always be forever thankful that they've created this game because of everything that has sprung up from it. So I'm just really looking forward for part 2, especially after intermission.
Yeah, because I feel like, I feel like we kind of touched on it, but like there were, I don't want to say complaints and concerns, but maybe complaints and concerns are the right words, but I didn't really have a whole lot of negativity to say, but we got intermission and saw in just a year after the game releasing how much better certain aspects could be. And just like how great Yuffie's combat was and just how many cool things that they were able to already add in just a year, that the excitement and hope for, again, we're going to be going into part 2 with expectations,
Yeah, let's just say expectations have now been set. They are set now, and we are holding them to it. So they have to either do as good as part 1 or better, because they've set the bar for themselves. Hopefully better. They've set the bar for themselves. Now let's see if they can raise it.
Agreed. For now, I think we will leave it there. Next episode, we will dive into, what we actually thought of Remake itself and dive into things like combat, game mechanics, new story elements that were added and how it's different and where we think it's going. We're going to try and stay away from the ending because the ending is just its own beast in and of itself and really one of the big divisive things in the community. So we really want to not have to rush ourselves. For now, thank you for listening. You can find us on Twitter at Magus Brothers. Fair, where can everybody find you?
Oh, yeah, social media. I'm Feyerbrand. Feyerbrand on everything. Twitter, YouTube. I think I still have an Instagram, but yeah, you can find me at Feyerbrand. I'm that guy. I'm all over the place.
And if you want to look me up personally, I'm Albatross Hill on Twitter. But for the most part, I'm much more active on the Magus Brothers podcast. Again, shout out to Chris with the First Encounters podcast. Thank you so much for everything you did for us. They are wonderful. Check them out. And also, as we are recording today, even though Haney can't listen to this episode,
get wrecked,
as it is not Haney safe. Happy birthday, Haney. One day you'll be able to hear this message.
Happy birthday.
But for now, enjoy yourselves, and thank you for listening.
In like 3 years.
Oh God, probably longer than that, honestly. Like the whole remake saga will be done and he'll finally be caught up and he'll be like, okay, I can just do this all at the same time. He's got so much to play.
Anyways, bye.
Bye.